Andrew, welcome back to Spectator TV.
Thank you.
Now, it's been a dramatic week for Scottish politics, to say the least. Let's talk about Humza Yousef to start with. How much of this was an unforced error on his part?
I mean, most of what Mr. Yousef did was an unforced error. I mean, he went from error to error to error. I mean, every time he gave an interview, there was another hostage to fortune. I suggested to some of the people close to him that every time a microphone was shoved under his nose, he didn't have to respond. But he felt he did, and he became not so much First Minister as First Pundit. He felt he had to kind of comment on everything. And of course, the ultimate error of all, and I think it's partly a result that he lived, as a lot of them do, in an echo chamber. He's only ever surrounded by people who agree with everything he says. He's never challenged within his own party. He's surrounded by people who just say, yes, First Minister, that's a good idea. And the ultimate miscalculation, and it was a miscalculation you could see coming towards you like a locomotive, which was that the Greens would be really annoyed if he dumped them. And he dumped them. And lo and behold, they were really annoyed and out for revenge. I mean, these are people that never expected to be in government in the first place. And they were really annoyed when they ceased to be in government. If he had waited for the Green Party to decide to withdraw from the coalition because, like many governments all over the Western world, the Scottish government was withdrawing from its net zero targets, then he could then have said, well, we're sorry to see you go. We've done some great things together. I will now continue as a minority government and hope on some things I can still count on your support, where we have a common agenda, above all on independence for Scotland. That would have seen him through. But no, he wanted to show he was a tough guy. He was taking the initiative. He dumped them. I mean, it's like a teenager knowing your girlfriend's going to dump you. So you dump her before she dumps you. And, you know, when you put teenagers in charge of government, you get what we've seen in the past week to 10 days.
Indeed. Andrew, how do you think history will remember him in his time as First Minister?
Well, history will barely remember him at all. Humza-who. I mean, he was only there for 13 months and he has no achievements to his belt. Just as his time in the Justice Department, in the Transport Department, and then in the Health Department. All three of these, he presided over a catalogue of errors, and so thin is the gene pool in Scottish politics in general, but in the SNP in particular, that every time he screwed something up, he got promoted to his next level of incompetence. So I think he'll be a footnote in Scottish history. And it's interesting because although he's one of these first ministers that will go down with Henry McLeish, whoever remembers him outside a few nerds like me, or John McConnell, or was it Connell? I can't even remember now. Whoever remembers them. So it will be the case with him. But even more important for the SNP is not only will he not be remembered very much at all, the giants of modern Scottish nationalism, Alex Salmond and Nicola Sturgeon, their reputations are in the dirt as well. So it's a pretty bad time all round for the SNP at the moment.
Well, Andrew, do you think that he will be remembered as the First Minister who lost Scottish independence for the foreseeable, or do you think that that decline came before him?
He may well be blamed for the loss of Scottish independence, at least the ability to get to anything like it. But if he is, that would be unfair. I mean, he did nothing to help it at all, but I think it was lost before he became First Minister. I think Nicola Sturgeon saw the writing was on the wall, that there was almost nothing she could do. A second referendum was an impossibility for the foreseeable future. And that although there is still a substantial, at least the polls tell us anyway, there's a substantial support for Scottish independence, the polls also tell us two other things, which are just as relevant. One, outside the SNP cult, very few people are in the rush to have a second referendum. No one's gagging for it outside the SNP cult. And secondly, although they tell pollsters, yeah, we'd like Scotland to be independent, it doesn't even feature in even the 5 most important issues facing Scotland at the moment. If you ask people to rate the 5 most important issues, independence is not one. Indeed, in some polls, it doesn't even come in the top 10. So it may be a vague aspiration, it would be nice one day, but actually at the moment, could we have better schools? Could we have better hospitals? Could we have roads that aren't covered in potholes? Maybe we could do some of that before we think of independence. So I think that was already happening. I think it's the reason why Nicola Sturgeon got out. Part of the reason why the SNP is beginning to bifurcate. You know, the SNP used to be the most disciplined political party in Britain. It spoke with one voice. Now it's divided every which way. Alex Salmond has formed ALBA. The party itself is split between small c conservatives and progressive radicals. And I think that kind of bifurcation, these splits, indeed it's more than a bifurcation because it's more than a two-way split. I think that speaks to the fact that the main aim, the reason they get out of bed in the morning, independence, ain't going to happen for the foreseeable future.
Well, and also none of that is helped by the fact that Nicola Sturgeon and her entourage are currently still being investigated.
Yes, I mean, it never rains but it pours for the SNP at the moment. It's sort of death by 1,000 cuts. And that's part of the, how could you put it, the disillusionment or the degrading of the reputations of those who, as I've said, were the giants of modern Scottish nationalism. I mean, if you take Alex Salmond and Nicola Sturgeon, I always thought the London media overrated Nicola Sturgeon, as the London media usually does about Scottish politicians. But you can't take it away from her. She was a formidable operator. She was competent and formidable, and she handled herself well in public, and she led her party well. And of course, Alex Salmond had that huge reputation too. But that has gone. Both of them are in some trouble. Mr. Salmond won his court case, all the charges of sexual harassment against them. All of them, bar one, was not guilty. The other one was the peculiarly Scottish verdict of not proven. He won his case. But what we learned about Mr. Salmond by the testimony, which was not challenged by his side, meant he didn't come across as quite the kind of person that you would hope he would be, or that he himself would hope he would be. And then, of course, we've got Nicola Sturgeon's years now mired, almost become a sense of ridicule. I mean, jokes about the camper van, about the kind of in the line of duty type tent in her front garden. I mean, the Scottish nationalists take themselves very seriously. They don't like being ridiculed, and it's been hard to avoid ridiculing them when you've got a camper van paid for, apparently by the SNP, parked in the driveway of Nicola Sturgeon's mother-in-law's driveway. I mean, why was it there? I mean, was it a getaway van? You know, was it a campaign van? Who put it there? Did the mother-in-law, who I think in her 80s, did she ever even know was it there? Or maybe she thought it was an ice cream van, you know, which are very popular in Scotland. I just don't know. But it's hard not to ridicule them now. And of course, that upsets them even more than substantive criticism.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking ahead to the SNP's future then, Andrew, who do you think would be better for the party?
Well, I think it's interesting that other than John Swinney so far, and by the time this goes out, maybe Kate Forbes, we'll see, no one else has thrown their hat into the ring. And that in itself is quite telling. It seems that other than at most 2 people, nobody wants the job. They're not queuing up. And I think that's because they see it pretty much as a poisoned chalice. I mean, I think things are so far gone now for the SNP for the foreseeable future that why would you want it? Because there's basically nothing you can do to turn the SNP round in time for the general election, which we all assume will come sometime this autumn. They are cruising for a bruising in the general election. They're going to lose a lot of seats, and Labour will probably end up the largest party in Scotland once again. Indeed, the Tories, through quirks of the electoral system, they may even pick up a couple of seats in Scotland. Come the election, it'll be a bad night for the SNP, and there's not much you can do about it. Then, a year or two later, you have the Scottish elections for Holyrood, and I'm not sure there's much you can do on that, because if independence is now effectively off the agenda, then what does the SNP run on? The only thing it can run on is its record. And when it comes to schools and hospitals and roads and infrastructure and Scottish economic development and company formation, creation of wealth rather than just the spending of it, SNP's record is not that great. In fact, it's the opposite. File that under British understatement. It's anything but great. So that's not a record to run on either. And so therefore, I think it's perfectly possible that Labour could end up the largest party in Holyrood as well. So why would you want to do that? The attraction of John Swinney is that he's just a caretaker. He's done the job before. He was widely regarded as pretty useless when he did the job before, but at least he's a safe pair of hands. He's not a bad man. He's a decent guy. Put him in, let him be the ancient mariner that takes the ship onto the rocks.
And Andrew, looking ahead to those elections coming then, the general election and the Holyrood elections, if Labour does wipe out the SNP at the polls during these times, do you think it could do a better job on those policy issues that you've mentioned, tackling the drug deaths, tackling the declining education system, for example? Could they do a better job domestically?
First of all, let me say, Cindy, even a very good result for Labour at the general election will not result in the total wipeout of the SNP. A good result for them would be to replace the SNP as the party with the most seats in Westminster coming out of Scotland. But the SNP, whatever it does, however bad it could be, however terrible its domestic record, however much decline it has presided over, however much its failure to deliver on its core mission, which is Scottish independence, retains a grip on a substantial minority of Scottish voters. So even if it's not the largest party after the next general election, it'll still be the second largest party, and probably by a long way. So it does not get wiped out. It's in a, let me put it this way, it is in a better position in Scotland than the Conservatives are in the United Kingdom as a whole at the moment. So it survives to fight another day. It'll just take, in my view, a long while to get back to anywhere near where it's been in the past 10 to 15 years. As for Labour, I think if Labour takes control, becomes not just the largest Scottish party in Westminster, but takes control of Holyrood, as a minority, it'll be a minority government. Labour will not get an overall majority in Holyrood. I'm not holding my breath, because in many of the issues, whether it was gender self-identification or the net zero targets or basically an emphasis, I mean, what bedevils Scottish politics, and Labour must take its fair share of this, is that today's generation of Scottish politicians are brilliant at spending the wealth. They can come up with all manner of schemes for spending wealth. Free this, free that, free tuition fees, free bus tickets, free prescriptions. You know, if it walks, moves and breathes, it should be free. They're great at that, and they are useless at explaining how you generate wealth. How do you create the wealth that you can then spend? And the Scottish economy has been going nowhere for some time now. Without North Sea oil, without a massive financial centre in Edinburgh, which since the Great Crash it hasn't been, world famous names like the Bank of Scotland, Standard Life, Royal Bank of Scotland, either that they no longer exist or they're a shadow of their former selves. And I don't see Labour having any of the policies, given that in many areas it's simply SNP light, that it's going to turn much of that round. So what dismays me as a proud Scot who sometimes gets very angry with his country because of the decisions it takes and the kind of politicians it elects, is that even if there is a change in Holyrood and Labour take over, I fear that the long-term decline of Scotland continues, because there is nothing in what Labour currently stands for that's going to reverse that decline. And that's a huge pity, because there was a time when Scotland was an economic powerhouse, and Glasgow was the second city of the empire, and it was synonymous with entrepreneurial endeavour and wealth and a world-class education system. It is the reason why it was the Scots who made and ran the British Empire, not the English. It was the Scots, because they were better educated. More of them went to university. We had 4 universities, 5 on some counts, when England only had 2, and yet we were a country which was, I think, a 5th or a 6th of England's population. These are all things that allowed Scotland to punch above its weight and made it much more important than really it should have been. None of the kind of framework, the kind of policy structure that created that kind of Scotland is being proposed by the SNP or Labour. So it's disappointing, and I don't go back very often now. I haven't really got much family there anymore. But when I do go back, it strikes the decline and the deterioration strike me as very sad, when you've got sanitation workers in Glasgow now saying that they don't want to empty the bins because too many of them are being bitten by rats. When you see a city like Glasgow fraying at the edges, and even much more affluent Edinburgh begin to fray at the edges too. What Scotland needs, regardless of who's in power, is a political system that makes the creation of wealth the priority before it decides how to distribute it. Let's bake a cake for the 21st century that works, and then worry about how we're going to slice it. But I'm afraid that's not on the agenda from the SNP or from the Labour Party in Scotland.
Well, Andrew, thank you so much for taking the time to join Spectator TV today.